Hi, everybody, and welcome to this module titled Research-Based Strategies to Support the Development of Comprehension. I am Shelby Skonis, and I am thrilled to have the opportunity to spend a few hours with you as we dig deeper into this topic. You will have a facilitator for this session, and their job really is to start and stop the video at certain points to give you an opportunity to process information that was presented, perhaps to watch a video and then debrief what you observe in the video, or even just spend time thinking about how the information relates to your context. So again, I'm Shelby Skonis, and let's get started. The learning intention for our time together is really this. We will deepen our understanding of some research-based instructional practices to support the development of comprehension. Before we begin taking a look at our content for today, I'd like you to turn to page 2 in your participant handout and use that document to record a couple of notes for yourself. I'd like you to think about where you feel the most confident in delivering comprehension instruction to your students, and what aspect of comprehension is still a bit of a challenge. Just take a couple of minutes to take a couple of notes for yourself, and then we will move on. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the simple view of reading. This is a formula demonstrating a pretty widely accepted view that reading has two basic components: word recognition or decoding, and language comprehension. The simple view formula has been supported and validated by a number of research studies over many years. So even though this was introduced in 1986, it has been supported and studied since then. The simple view formula is decoding, or D, times language comprehension, or LC, equals reading comprehension. The simple view formula and supporting studies show that a student's reading comprehension score can be predicted if decoding skills and language comprehension abilities are known. Notice here, what's really important is that D and LC are not added together to predict reading comprehension. They are multiplied. In the simple view formula, the values of D and LC must be between 0 and 1, or 0% and 100%. A score of 0 means no skill or ability at all, and 1 would indicate perfection or mastery. A student with excellent decoding skills and strong language comprehension in the subject area of a particular text will achieve a strong reading comprehension score. The simple view shows that for a student with both D and LC equal to 100%, the RC, or reading comprehension score, would be 100%. Reading comprehension scores will not be an average of decoding and language comprehension. When one variable is strong, reading comprehension will be equal to the weaker variable. For example, a student with excellent decoding skills will achieve reading comprehension equal to his or her language comprehension skills in the subject area being tested. The simple view shows that for a student with D equal to 100%, the RC score will be equal to the LC score. For instance, a student with a D score of 100% and an LC score of 50% will have an RC, or reading comprehension score, of 50%. Any improvement in this student's language comprehension skills will result in an equal improvement in reading comprehension. Improving the LC score to 70%, for instance, will result in a concurrent increase in reading comprehension to 70%. And those numbers could be switched to reflect weaker decoding, stronger language comprehension. So that was just an example of how that equation works to predict reading comprehension. And in the simple view of reading, D, or decoding, is the ability of the student to sound out or decode the written words using the principles of phonics. It involves knowledge of print concepts, being phonologically aware. It involves having skill with phonics and word recognition, a deep sight word vocabulary, and then the ability to read text fluently with accuracy, a sufficient rate, and with prosody. And LC, or language comprehension, is the ability to make sense of the language we hear and the language that we read. It involves skills such as inferential language skills, using literal comprehension skills, having narrative language skills, having a sense and a knowledge of academic vocabulary, then having background knowledge that can be applied to any given text. Today, for this session, we will touch on the topics of inferential language skills, narrative language skills, literal comprehension skills, and just a little bit about background knowledge. For our work together in this session, we will spend a lot of time digging into the IES practice guide titled Improving Reading Comprehension in Kindergarten through 3rd Grade. A practice guide is a publication that presents recommendations for educators to address challenges in their classrooms or their schools. The practice guides are based on reviews of research, the experiences of practitioners like you, and the expert opinions of a panel of nationally recognized experts. This guide is intended for teachers and reading coaches, principals, and other educators. It focuses on reading comprehension abilities that may be taught specifically to students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. The panel for this practice guide selected a definition of reading comprehension that emphasizes both what the author has written and the reader's ability to use their background knowledge and thinking ability to make sense of what they read. The panel defines reading comprehension as this: the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through interaction and involvement with written language. Extracting meaning is to understand what an author has stated explicitly or implicitly. Constructing meaning is to interpret what an author has said by bringing one's capacities, abilities, knowledge, and experiences to bear on what he or she is reading. These personal characteristics also may affect the comprehension process. This is a really nice graphic which demonstrates how the What Works Clearinghouse practice guides can help us as educators. The practice guides provide us with the best research evidence available. They combine expert panel knowledge with rigorous research findings, and they offer specific recommendations to address educational challenges. And we will spend time with many of those recommendations in our time together today. Each practice guide includes a summary of the existing research on a key topic, in this case, comprehension in grades K through grade 3, a discussion of practices that are supported by the research evidence, key examples to demonstrate the concepts discussed. They also include definitions of key terms and concepts, specific recommendations for how to address educational issues, and a system of evidence levels for each recommendation. The 5 recommendations in this guide promote practices that have shown promise in increasing reading comprehension among students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. To be successful, however, these 5 recommendations must be implemented in concert and clearly explained in a rich context that includes the following: a comprehensive literacy curriculum, ample opportunity for students to read and write while receiving feedback from their teachers, additional instruction and practice for students identified as needing more support, and adequate resources for students and teachers. So let's take a look at the 5 recommendations. Recommendation 1 encourages teachers to teach students a variety of strategies that will help them understand and retain what they read and thus become independent, resourceful readers. Recommendation 2 is about how to teach young readers to recognize how a text is organized or structured. Authors structure text in a variety of ways to get their point across. And recognizing text structure can build students' understanding of what they are reading and improve their ability to recall it. Recommendation 3 suggests that teachers discuss the text with students to improve their reading comprehension. This approach will allow young readers to more deeply explore the ideas in the text they are reading. In guiding the discussion, teachers should model ways to think about the text that can help students when they are reading independently. Recommendation 4 emphasizes the importance of choosing texts that specifically support the goals of teaching and improving reading comprehension. And finally, recommendation 5 outlines how teachers can motivate students to improve their efforts to comprehend text. Constructing meaning while reading can be demanding, cognitive work, and teachers who hold their students' interests may be more effective in helping them to develop good reading comprehension skills. In our time together, we will take a look at recommendation 1 through 4 pretty deeply. All right. Recommendation 1 in the IES practice guide is teach students how to use reading comprehension strategies. So we know that good readers use many forms of thinking and analyzing text as they read. It is really important to teach beginning readers strategies for constructing meaning from text. A strategy is the intentional application of a cognitive routine by a reader before, during, or after reading a text. Comprehension strategies help readers enhance their understanding, overcome difficulties in comprehending text, and compensate for weak or imperfect knowledge related to the text. The strategies may be taught one by one in isolation, or they can be taught in combination. Both approaches can improve reading comprehension. So the panel does recommend that teachers or you choose the approach that's most comfortable for you in the classroom. Teachers should also help students learn how to use comprehension strategies independently through the gradual release of responsibility. And when releasing responsibility to students, be mindful that students differ in the extent of modeling or support they need from teachers in order to use those strategies effectively while they are reading independently. At this point, I'd like for you to turn to page 3 in your participant handout and spend a couple of minutes reflecting on identification and then possible discussion of what you currently do to teach students how to use reading comprehension strategies. So use the document in your participant handout to write a couple of notes to yourself so that you'll be ready to have a discussion with colleagues. Sometimes the terms comprehension strategy and comprehension skills are used interchangeably, and they actually mean different things. For the purpose of the IES practice guide, they would not want you to be confused about a strategy versus a skill. So what the panel refers to as strategies are not the same as comprehension skills typically listed in core reading programs. Nor are comprehension strategies teaching activities. So comprehension skills can be thought of as tasks that a reader is often asked or assigned to complete to reflect on or demonstrate understanding after a text has been read. They're pretty straightforward and ultimately they're designed to address questions that students are expected to answer about a text. Like, can the student compare the difference and similarities between two characters in a text? Can the student sequence the narrative text correctly or not? And can the student infer meaning from an illustration in a text or not? Comprehension strategies, on the other hand, are intentional mental actions during reading that improve reading comprehension. They are deliberately employed by a reader to better understand or remember what is being read. So when we talk about strategies, they are not typically instructional activities that involve completing a worksheet. Worksheets just rarely include instruction in what students should do actively, metacognitively to improve their comprehension. And strategies are not exercises that are aimed at giving students practice with skills like sequencing or drawing conclusions, um, and that lack explicit instruction in how to really think in ways when they are reading text. So the IES practice guides provide us with recommendations. We just reviewed recommendation 1 a few slides back, and it was teach students how to use comprehension strategies. The IES practice guides also provide us with guidance on how to carry out that recommendation. So in this case, the first piece of guidance is teach students how to use several research-based reading comprehension strategies. Teachers should explain to students how to use several strategies that have been shown to improve reading comprehension because different strategies cultivate different kinds of thinking. The panel believes that 6 strategies in particular that will improve comprehension are the most important for reading comprehension in the primary grades. Teachers should explain how the strategies can help the students learn from text, as opposed to having them memorize these strategies. And we should teach them how to use these strategies effectively. Okay, now if you will turn to participant handout page 4, you will see a document which outlines the 6 strategies that the panel felt to be most important for instructional practice for kindergarten students through grade 3 students. The document shows you the effective strategy. It gives you a description of that strategy and then provides an activity that would promote the use of that strategy. So your job right now is to spend a couple of minutes reviewing this document, review the effective strategies identified by the panel, and then I'd like you to take a couple of notes and identify instructional activities that you've utilized to promote the particular strategies identified here. Welcome back. The second piece of guidance on how to carry out recommendation 1, teaching students how to use comprehension strategies, is to teach reading comprehension strategies individually or in combination. So essentially, teachers use a single or a multiple strategy instructional approach. The single strategy instructional approach introduces each strategy individually one at a time and includes practice for some period of time, usually a few weeks, but can be a little more or a little less, before the next strategy is introduced. And then over time, students come to master a collection of strategies. It might be easier, especially in kindergarten through 3rd grade, to begin with the single strategy instructional approach because it allows the teacher and the students to focus on just one strategy at a time. It's also important to remember, though, as additional strategies are introduced, teachers would encourage students to use all the strategies that have been previously taught that they have learned because students may forget previous strategies or stop using them when a new strategy is introduced. On the flip side, multiple strategy instruction introduces several strategies at the same time, and they are practiced in combination so that readers learn to use them together when they read. It's important to note, though, that the panel for the IES Practice Guide does not really believe that there's enough evidence to advocate the use of multiple strategy instruction over single strategy instruction. And therefore, they do recommend that you choose the approach that's best for you in your classroom environment. With either approach, though, it's important to remember that the goal is ultimately to teach students several strategies. Multiple strategy instruction might be more complicated initially, but it does familiarize students with using the strategies together from the very beginning. And it does provide a sense of a more authentic, strategic reading experience. The IES Practice Guide panel refers us to 4 examples of multiple strategy formats that combine strategies with a very explicit method of teaching them. These methods have all been the subject of research. Table 4 in the IES Practice Guide shows us these methods, and they are reciprocal teaching, transactional strategy instruction, informed strategies for learning, and concept-oriented reading instruction. So if you'd like to learn more about those methods for multiple strategy formats, you would take a look at Table 4 in the IES Practice Guide and review the information there. It's really important to remember, especially as educators of kindergarten students through 3rd grade, that we provide students with a sense of how each strategy is applied and how it differs from other strategies that they may have learned previously. We also should consider creating opportunities for students to read and practice using strategies with their peers, with other teachers, and then ultimately independently. Okay, so we've spent a little bit of time digging a little deeper into recommendation 1, which is teach students how to use comprehension strategies. So right now, I'd like you to take a look at page 3 in your participant handout. And that page gives you a place to record some notes for reflection. Additionally, you'll need the Reading for Meaning rubric to be able to complete this task. So in a couple of minutes, we'll pause the video. You'll grab both of those documents, page 3 in your participant handout and the Reading for Meaning rubric. And I'd like you to identify and then be able to discuss ideas that were confirmed for you about the use of comprehension strategy instruction. And then I'd like you to review the Reading for Meaning rubric and identify how comprehension strategy instruction supports specific components of the rubric. So identify those specific components. And then if you look across the rubric, I'd like you to think about what it might take to receive a score of 3 or implemented in your teaching context when focused on the development of comprehension in the area, of course, of recommendation 1, which is teaching students comprehension strategies. So you'll have a little bit of time to complete that reflection, and then we will move on to recommendation 2. Okay, let's take a look at recommendation 2. Recommendation 2 is to teach students to identify and use the text's organizational structure to comprehend, learn, and remember content. The panel does believe that students comprehend and remember content better when they are taught to recognize the structure of a text because it can help them to extract meaning and construct meaning while reading. For instance, understanding how stories are organized helps students to distinguish between major events and minor events and predict how a story might unfold. Students can begin to develop a sense of structure as early as kindergarten. The panel believes that students in the early grades should also be exposed to informational text because its structure can build their understanding and recall of key points. The panel believes that teachers should teach students to recognize text structure by gradually releasing responsibility while keeping the goal of independent reading in mind. The idea here is to prepare students to draw on what they know about the structure of a text to help them understand more complex texts down the road. And before we take a look at this recommendation a little closer, I'd like you to turn to page 5 in your participant handout and just take a couple of minutes to think about your current instructional practices to teaching students about the structure of text, both literary text and informational text. So just take a couple of notes to yourself. So when we talk about the text's organizational structure, this is really what we're referring to. And these are the most appropriate structures for kindergarten through 3rd grade. Narrative text or literary text is often structured by elements: character, setting, problem, solution, the events that happened in the story, typically the resolution or the outcomes, and then theme. Informational text, however, is organized by 5 pretty prominent structures, and they are cause and effect, compare contrast, description, sequence, and problem solution. So that really helps us think about the differences in how those 2 text types are organized. The guidance under recommendation 2 is that we would explain how to identify and connect the parts of narrative text. The panel does recommend that teachers both model and explain how to identify and understand the aspects in every story that give it meaning and shape, and that we engage students in identifying these elements and using them to guide their understanding of the text. Teachers can use your core reading program or authentic text to teach students about narrative text structures. And then class discussions of recently read books should include questions about key elements of those text structures. The panel also recommends that structure first be taught through stories that are familiar to students, especially at the kindergarten grade 1 level. Familiar stories like Goldilocks and the Three Bears or Little Red Riding Hood. We would ask our students to identify elements within that narrative text by providing some simpler clues or questions like when and where, who, what happened, and how did the story end. So here again are the elements of the structure in a narrative text: characters, setting, the goal, the problem, the action that happens in the story, the resolution, and then often we attend to theme in a story. Identifying story structure is the beginning of literary analysis in the secondary setting. So it's really important that as primary grade teachers, we consider tucking this into instruction often so that students become really readily able to identify the structure of narrative text. Explicit instruction on story structure does enhance students' memory and recall of these types of text. It has even greater benefits for struggling students. Being aware of story structure is an aid in summarizing. It helps students identify which parts of the story to attend to the most. And students can also practice identifying structural elements by making up their own stories, developing stories from story maps or illustrating each episode in a story, or just participating in a really dramatic oral retelling of a story. Teachers can also tailor activities that practice using other reading comprehension strategies to highlight structural elements such as plot development. Here is just one type of graphic organizer that can be helpful when thinking about the structure of narrative or literary text. This is called a story map, and a story map is a visual representation of a story. We would use this before reading to enhance students' ability to predict and set purposes for reading. We could use it while reading because it serves to focus attention and help the reader monitor information as it is coming to them. And then we can use it to compare to those earlier predictions. And we can use it after reading to begin to organize students' understanding of how the story took shape. The second piece of guidance under recommendation 2 is to provide instruction on common structures of informational text. The panel believes that teachers should introduce students not only to the structural elements in narrative text that we just went over, but also to the common structures of informational text. Informational text structures typically apply to individual paragraphs or passages, and sometimes in an entire text, there may be more than one informational text structure represented. The panel suggests that teachers use familiar ideas or topics when first teaching students about the structure of informational text, and initially use texts that provide clear and easy to read or recognize examples of those structures. Compare and contrast is a good example. A teacher could share a compare and contrast text on different types of pets or on different modes of transportation, and then have the students work together to create a table or a Venn diagram detailing the similarities and the differences. A teacher should then ask students to identify clue words or signal words in a passage, such as alike, unlike, both, but, however. These words signal the reader to a certain structure, and in this case, compare and contrast. It's super useful to teach early readers about clue words or signal words through topics that are familiar to them. Following that earlier example, the students can use a familiar text to locate a given clue word or signal word and figure out whether it's going to signal a similarity or a difference presented by the author. The students can then use these words to help them sort the facts in an unfamiliar compare and contrast text and create a table. Teachers can use a similar process to introduce students to the other common informational text structures that are going to be listed on the next slide. Once students can pretty comfortably identify the structure of a passage and recall its content, a teacher can replace leading questions like, what was the cause or what was the effect, with more complex questions that don't include those signal words, such as, how did the author organize the information in this text? So it would be really important at the K-3 level to make sure that instruction includes lots of opportunity for students to hear those signal words or clue words, utilize those signal words or clue words as they read the text to tip them off as to the text structure, and even use those clue words or signal words in their writing to help them organize their thinking in the text. As you know, informational text is organized or structured in a specific way to guide readers in identifying key information and making connections among ideas presented. Informational texts use a limited number of structures. There are 5 represented here on the screen, and these are the 5 most common. So they are description, sequence, problem solution, cause and effect, and compare and contrast. Each of these structures is associated with a set of signal words or clue words that I just mentioned. that can indicate the underlying structure or organization of the text. This table, this is Table 6 from the IES Practice Guide, includes descriptions of activities that teachers can use to practice applying a text structure to organize information, including ones that utilize graphic organization tools. We're going to get ready to watch a video which demonstrates an example of instruction focused on informational text structures. This video happens to be recorded in a third grade, fourth grade split classroom. However, I think there's a lot of things that we can take away from this video that can be incorporated into our kindergarten through third grade classrooms. I would like you to turn to page 6 of your participant handout. And there I have provided a document for you to record some notes on as you watch the video. So you will use this document to record your responses to a couple of questions on the document. And we'll get ready to watch that video in just a moment. And here's the video.
Welcome to Interactive Strategies for Teaching Nonfiction Text Structure.
Hi, my name is Dawn Chapelier. I teach 3rd and 4th graders at Garfield Elementary School in Garden City, Kansas. The objective of the lesson today is to introduce the idea that nonfiction text has a special organization. This gets students exposed to vocabulary and ideas associated with each text structure, which will essentially improve their comprehension of nonfiction text. What I do to help students identify and use the text organizational structure is to introduce the signal words and give them graphic organizers for new text structures. I use low-level text at first so that they're able to focus on the structure instead of the actual comprehension, and then we're able to work up to activities that use text that is actually at their instructional levels. Today, I'm introducing students to the compare and contrast text structure. Prior to today's lessons, I had students write down the signal words, the graphic organizer, and the definition for compare and contrast. This would allow us to begin today's lesson by searching for the signal words in an example passage and begin practicing using the graphic organizer a little bit faster. To begin the lesson, I read aloud a passage about chimpanzees, and that passage uses the text structure compare and contrast. This passage is shown on the smartboard, and students are instructed to follow along as I read it out loud. Then they come forward to circle the signal words that identify the compare and contrast text structure. And after we agree that all of the circled words are on the list of signal words, students are given instructions for the next activity. I engage students to be able to practice the strategy by getting to work with a partner. They look for signal words together. They work on recording the information in an appropriate graphic organizer, and they're doing that with a partner. So it helps them to be better involved in the activity. For today's lesson, some of the cooperative learning strategies are a think, pair, share. They get to talk with their shoulder partner before they share out with the class. Students are working cooperatively using red and blue colored pencils to show each student's work in the project. This is a Kagan cooperative learning strategy called Rally Table. They take turns writing and using different colors so I can see that the work is being shared by the partner group, and that if there are any misconceptions, it shows me who needs more help with this concept. During their independent time, I'm monitoring their work by moving around the classroom so I can clarify questions and misunderstandings. After about 10 minutes of work time, I give the students a 2-minute warning and ask them to finish their work. The pages are then collected so I can determine the next step in this series of lessons. The final activity incorporates the 2 text structures that they have learned up to this point. Each student is given a card with a passage, definition, or graphic organizer that is related to either the sequence or compare and contrast text structure. Students first mix and pass their cards until I say freeze. When I say freeze, they stop and read their card and decide which corner they will go to. When I say go to your corner, they go to the side of the room that has the sequence or compare and contrast poster, depending on what their card says. When they get to their corner, they check each other's cards, and I'm also moving around to be sure that answers are correct. When we repeat this process by passing the cards, freezing, and going to a new corner. As we learn more text structures, I'll be adding more cards that are related to the newly learned structures. When we do the next text structure, we'll also review the signal words and graphic organizers that we used for previously learned text structures. So we're going to be building on the text structures as we move on to the remaining 3 that we haven't done yet. And so when we do the description text structure, we'll also be reviewing sequence and compare and contrast. Students need to learn to identify some of these common structures of informational text because it will help their understanding of nonfiction, and it will help with their writing and help them better comprehend the text by organizing their thinking.
To learn more about interactive strategies for teaching nonfiction text structure, please explore the additional resources on the Doing What Works website.
Now you'll have just a brief amount of time to finish up your thoughts on the observations that you made while watching that video. And then you will have a discussion with your colleagues regarding the notes that you took. So you will just share some of your thinking around the steps that the teacher took to identify and use the organizational structure of the text. How the students practice the activity after whole group instruction. How did that final activity allow for practice and application of the skills learned? Because we know that that is important for students. And then how did she design specific instructional moves that aided in the success of this whole group lesson, which was focused on the compare and contrast text structure? So finish up your notes and then be ready for a discussion. All right, welcome back and great job. Now we're going to continue on with our discussion of informational text structures by looking at a resource that I have included in your participant packet. This is a really helpful, very condensed resource to support our knowledge in the informational text structures, as well as to use as an instructional tool. So this is found participant handout, pages 7 through 13. And what you have on these pages is each of the informational text structures on a one-pager. And that one-pager contains the text structure. It also contains the signal words and the phrases or clue words that are commonly used with that particular text structure. In this case, we're looking on the screen at problem solution. So the list of signal words is not an exhaustive list, but these are many of the words that we would want to use in instruction and identify when we do see those in a text that follows the problem solution text structure. There are some suggestions for some question frames that can be utilized with students in a discussion of text. And then on each of the pages, there are a couple of graphic organizers that are just commonly used to support, in this case, problem solution. The graphic organizers change with each text structure. You may already have a bank of graphic organizers that you use, so this is not intended to take the place of something you may already have. But if it adds to what you are currently doing, then I would suggest going ahead and utilizing this research-based document to support the instruction of informational text structures. Now it's your turn to practice. So now you will look at pages 12 and 13 specifically in your participant handout. And these pages have 5 paragraphs. So you will number off 1 to 5. You'll be placed into a group of 5 and number off 1 to 5. And then each of you will read the corresponding paragraph that goes with your number, and you will determine the text structure for that paragraph that you are aligned with. And then I want you to discuss why you chose that text structure. So were there signal words or clue words or phrases in the paragraph that tipped you off as to the potential structure of the text? Why did you choose that particular text structure? So your job is to number off 1 to 5, then read your corresponding paragraph, identify its text structure, and then determine and share why you chose that particular text structure. Your facilitator will let you know how long you have for this activity, and I'll see you back in just a little bit. Awesome job. I hope you found those last couple of activities beneficial for your understanding of recommendation 2 in the IES practice guide. So now we're going to bring a close to recommendation 2, and I'd like you to turn to page 5 in your participant handout. And I've organized a place for you to record some thinking. I'd like you to identify, and then you will discuss, ideas that were confirmed for you about the use of narrative and informational text structures to support comprehension of text. That's what recommendation 2 was all about. And then I'd like you to also have your Reading for Meaning rubric handy and refer to that and identify how the teaching of text structures supports specific components of the rubric. So identify those components. And then think about what might it take to receive a score of 3 on the rubric or implemented in your teaching context if you were focused on the development of comprehension, utilizing instruction that supports the teaching of narrative and informational text structures. Your facilitator again will tell you how much time you have for this activity, and then I'll see you back and we'll move on to the next recommendation. Wonderful. Now let's talk about recommendation 3 in the IES practice guide. And this recommendation is to guide students through focused, high-quality discussion on the meaning of text. The panel recommends that teachers lead their students through focused, high-quality discussions in order to help them develop a deeper understanding of what they're reading. Such discussions among students or between the students and the teacher go beyond just simply asking and answering really surface level questions to a more thoughtful exploration of the text. Through this type of exploration, students learn how to argue for or against points raised in the discussion. They resolve anything that is unknown about the text, and they can learn to draw conclusions or infer from the text. The panel also believes that students in kindergarten through 3rd grade are capable of having this kind of discussion if they have appropriate guidance from their teacher. Some of the suggestions for putting this recommendation into practice apply to more experienced readers, but the panel does believe that teachers can make these suggestions applicable to very early readers and struggling readers. For example, teachers can use read alouds or shared reading or pictures paired with text for students who are less developed readers. Teachers can also choose text and discussion questions that vary in complexity, so they don't all have to be of super high complexity. 4 factors contribute to the success of a discussion. The first 2 are related to planning. So teachers should select texts that are compelling enough to spark a discussion. Teachers should also create a discussion guide consisting of higher level questions that prompt students to think more deeply about the text and articulate key aspects of the story. The second 2 are related to sustaining and expanding the discussion. If higher order questions are challenging for your students, you can use follow-up questions to point them in the right direction. You can also split the class into smaller groups and ask students to discuss the text among themselves, checking in on them to ensure that they are indeed on the right track. This approach can build students' ability to think more critically and independently, which is a goal, about what they are reading. All right, I'd like for you to use page 14 of your participant handout to just have a quiet reflection on how you currently engage students in really focused, high quality discussion of text with the goal of helping them develop a deeper understanding of what you are reading or what they are reading. It's just a quiet reflection for a couple of minutes. The first bit of guidance for carrying out recommendation 3 is to structure the discussion to complement the text, the instructional purpose, and then the reader's ability and grade level. Teachers should consider how the type and the content of the text will affect the discussion that they plan to hold. The text used will affect the goals of a discussion, the extent to which the students are even interested in the discussion, and the questions that teachers will use to stimulate the discussion. A text is more likely to prompt a rich discussion, for example, if it features either a character who faces a conflict or a real-world problem that presents a dilemma. Discussions and questions about text should always be grounded in the state standards. Many state standards for younger students incorporate versions of the National Assessment of Educational Progress Standards, or NAEP, which include 3 categories of comprehension: locate and recall, integrate and interpret, and critique and evaluate. You can use these categories to frame discussion about text. Believing that high-quality discussions should address all 3 categories, the panel does provide some guidance on how each category can be approached. So for locate and recall, in discussion, the teacher and students should ask questions about what the text means, what the main idea is, and which details support that idea. Before the discussion, the teacher might prepare a guide for the class that highlights which questions students should ask and which the teacher should ask. Teachers should ask some questions and then moderate the discussion, but students should do most of the talking. For integrate and interpret, in discussion, the teacher begins by reminding students of the comprehension strategies they already know, which were addressed in Recommendation 1. The teacher then asks the students to read a small portion of the text themselves, or for younger students, read it out loud. When finished, the teacher leads a discussion about what they just read, and so on throughout the entire text. The questions asked by the teacher should lead the students to summarize what happens in the text and then to interpret these events in light of their own experiences, knowledge, or other parts of the text or previously read texts that connect to the topic. In critique and evaluate, for discussion, the teacher assigns a text or reads aloud a text that poses a dilemma about which students might disagree, such as the appropriateness of a particular character's actions or whether the outcome of a story seems realistic. The teacher then divides students into teams according to the opinions and they express after they read the text. Each team is asked to pick out parts of the text that support its opinion. To facilitate this process, the teacher could distribute sticky notes to students and ask them to mark these points in the text. Students could also mark text that they think is confusing, and teachers could use this material as the basis of a class discussion about what information is needed to make the text easier to understand. Of course, critique and evaluate is pretty cognitively demanding. The students are responsible for a lot independently with the model that I just talked about. But again, that can be structured in a way for younger students or struggling readers that they can begin to critique and evaluate, but in a more scaffolded manner. The panel does provide some suggestions when thinking about employing this with younger readers or struggling readers. Read a section aloud and have students discuss it with a partner and then report back to the class. So to start a discussion at this point, the teacher can ask students, for instance, whether they think the character did the right thing. Then partners discuss and then they report back to the class. The second piece of guidance for carrying out Recommendation 3 is to develop discussion questions that require students to really think deeply about the text. Teachers should develop higher order questions that encourage students to think deeply about what the text means rather than just identify simply recalling details about the text. Questions should reflect what teachers want students to draw from the text, including implicit as well as explicit information. And they generally should not be simplistic, like what was the boy's name or what color was the house. And they shouldn't just ask for an opinion, like, did you like the story? Typical higher order questions include frames like, why did, and what do you think? If you were the author, and what does this remind you of and why? This is a screenshot of Table 8 from the IES Practice Guide. And this table shows sample higher order questions that are linked to the NAEP's 3 categories of comprehension that we just reviewed. When preparing questions, it would be important to think about the best time to present each question to students. Is it before reading, is it during reading, or is it after reading? And similarly, teachers should determine exactly where in the text a question will be asked. For students in kindergarten and first grade, shared reading time or read alouds provide an opportunity to introduce higher order questions that really do invite discussion. And the next piece of guidance is to ask follow-up questions that would encourage and facilitate discussion. Reading comprehension improves when teachers ask follow-up questions that are specifically designed to focus students and encourage students to apply the reading comprehension strategies that you have taught them. In a discussion, teachers should respond to the students' answers in a way that leads them to think about and elaborate on their initial answers and the meaning of the text. Teachers should ask students to refer to the text to justify their answers. And depending on the grade level, this may mean just recalling events and passages in the text or pointing to illustrations to justify their answers. Follow-up questions designed by you should both provide students with a model for thinking about the text and its meaning more actively, and then help them learn to construct and support opinions with textual evidence. On the screen now, you'll see some examples, again, not an exhaustive list, but just some examples of recommended follow-up questions. They are, what makes you say that? What happened in the book that makes you think that? Can you explain what you meant when you said blank? Do you agree with blank, with what blank said? Why or why not? How does what you said connect with what so-and-so already said? Let's see if what we read provides us with any information that can resolve blanks and blanks disagreement. And what does the author have to say about that? So really great frames for follow-up questions that do invite discussion in both a small group and a whole group structure. And for younger readers or struggling readers, these types of questions can of course be adapted to better meet them where they are at. Teachers of kindergarten or first grade students, and those students are just becoming familiar with these types of questions, really might have to ask more follow-up questions to clarify what in the text led the students to respond as they did. They really do need a strong model of what it looks like to use the text to help support their thinking. And then just a note that younger students also might find it difficult to take on the viewpoint of the author or a specific character. So that may be difficult for them in follow-up questions. Alrighty, we're getting ready to watch another video. This one is a little bit lengthy, so settle in. But we are going to watch a demonstration of an interactive read aloud, specifically with the purpose of engaging students in discussion of text and asking some higher level thinking questions. So we'll get ready to watch that in just a moment. Please make sure that you have page 15 of your participant handout readily available so that you can take notes to respond to some specific questions related to the video. All right, let's watch the video, and your facilitator will advise you on the best way to be able to access this video. You can see I've included the link on the slide if that is going to be the most efficient way to access the video, but look for guidance from your facilitator and enjoy watching. Now, I'd like you to finish putting any final thoughts together regarding the video that we just watched, which was a demonstration of an interactive read aloud. And then you will just have a discussion with colleagues about the observations that you made, and your facilitator will let you know how long you will have. Right, we're getting ready to bring a close to recommendation 3. So I would like for you to have page 14 of your participant handout ready, and you'll just spend a couple of minutes making some notes regarding the prompts on the screen. So I'd like you to identify and then be ready to discuss ideas that were confirmed for you in this section about the use of focused, high-quality discussions in order to really help students develop a deeper understanding of what they're reading. And then just like in a previous reflection, I really want you to turn to the Reading for Meaning rubric and identify how text-based discussions support specific components of the rubric. And then if you were to receive a score of 3 or implemented on that rubric in your teaching context, so your specific grade level, what might that look like to receive a score of 3? So you'll have a few moments to jot some notes regarding these prompts on the screen. We have made it to recommendation 4 in the IES practice guide, and it is select text purposefully to support comprehension development. There is really no such thing as the perfect text when it comes to selecting a text for reading comprehension. The panel believes that early exposure to different types of text builds the capacity to understand the large variety of reading material that students will encounter as they move from grade to grade. There are no specific texts that the panel believes are more appropriate than others for comprehension strategy instruction. Specifically for younger students, the panel does believe that all texts require students to make inferences or check their understanding, and students' comprehension could always be enhanced by retelling elements of text. So please open up to page 16 of your participant handout. Just take a couple of reflection moments to think about how you currently select text to support comprehension instruction. The first bit of guidance for carrying out recommendation 4 is to teach reading comprehension with multiple genres of text. The NAEP reading framework divides text into 2 broad types, literary and informational. The panel recommends that teachers use both of these text types to teach reading comprehension instruction, because a student's mastery of one text type does not necessarily transfer to the other. State standards may provide additional guidance on which genres students should be able to comprehend at a given grade level, so you'd want to check that. Digital text may also be literary or informational, and the panel does believe that students should learn how to read and comprehend digital text as well. Here is just a display of the many types of text that fall under those 2 broad categories of literary and informational text. Literary texts include fiction, literary nonfiction, and poetry. And in the elementary grades, literary texts can include historical fiction, fables, and autobiographies as well. Informational texts include any type of expository writing, pieces that argue in favor of one position or over another, and procedural texts and documents like brochures and how-to articles. In the elementary grades, informational texts can include news articles, speeches, and timelines as well. Another piece of guidance is to choose texts with word recognition and comprehension difficulty appropriate for the student's reading ability and the instructional activity. Teachers should select text that is neither too simple nor too difficult for students. There are at least two aspects of text difficulty. One is textual or linguistic demands, and that is the decodability of the words, the complexity of the sentences, and the organization of the text, and the clarity of the formatting. And the other is content demands. How complex or how abstract or how subtle is the information presented? These two aspects of difficulty can vary within the same text, so teachers should be mindful of both. And in the panel's experience, a text that is easy to decode could be too difficult for students to comprehend because the information might be complicated or particularly unfamiliar. Similarly, a text that deals with concepts that are simple to comprehend might be too demanding with respect to word recognition. Though the panel does not recommend choosing texts that are too difficult for students to read or understand, they should have opportunities to read somewhat challenging texts. Challenging texts may be most appropriate during activities where there is support from an adult, such as shared reading time or guided reading. Student interest and background knowledge of the text subject may also increase their motivation to try to comprehend what they read. So teachers might choose a more challenging text when the topic is of interest or is familiar to students. Here on the screen, I wanted to just spend a moment taking a look at some different text types and the purposes for using those. Why you might choose one text type over another, depending on your purpose. So let's take a look at the screen. Patterned text is really best used when thinking about teaching concepts of print or how to use picture clues. And they often have frequent use of high frequency words in them. So if that were the purpose, then a patterned text would be a really appropriate choice. Rebus text, again, high frequency word practice and concepts of print. And this is the type of text where students read the same thing over. I see the blank. I like the blank. Decodable text, students examine words in ways that help them internalize and solidify sound spelling patterns in long-term memory. So we choose decodable text when we are wishing for students to practice and apply the sound spelling patterns that we have taught them in phonics or the foundational skills instruction. Leveled texts are texts that are written to fit a certain criteria, a certain reading level. They might have specific vocabulary within them, or they may sometimes focus on a specific comprehension strategy. So leveled texts may meet the needs for teaching comprehension strategies if they have a focus on those. And then authentic literature texts. These are texts that are written to tell a story without trying to fit a certain text criteria. So these are the wonderful books in the library, and if you are using a core reading program, they are typically your anthology or your anchor text. And the next piece of guidance is to use texts that support the purpose of instruction. Make really well-intentioned choices about the text that you will use. The many purposes of reading comprehension lessons could include improving students' application of reading comprehension strategies, or building their knowledge of specific genres, structures, and texts, or developing their ability to engage in higher order discussions about the text. Given this large variety of potential goals, the panel believes that these points are important for teachers to consider when selecting text to support the instructional purpose. So when the teacher is giving a lesson on text structure, the panel suggests begin with a text about a familiar topic in which the structure is easy to identify. Then move to a text on a less familiar topic and with a somewhat more complex or challenging structure. If you are introducing students to a strategy, like summarizing, select a text where the strategy is easily applied, and then once students have had time to practice, select a more challenging text. And to build a student's depth of understanding, the panel would suggest avoiding texts that focus on a student's knowledge of letter-sound relationships, like decodable text. These types of texts are more suitable for practicing decoding and word recognition, and they're often not written for deep meaning. If you are teaching students to make predictions, you would want to select a text that is unfamiliar to them, or one in which many outcomes are possible. That last slide brings up the idea of considerate text versus inconsiderate text. And considerate text really does facilitate comprehension and learning, while inconsiderate text can be more difficult for students to engage in instructional activities that are working to develop their use of comprehension strategies and then ultimately gain meaning from the text. So considerate texts are written in ways that really do support the student's navigation of the message or the strategy that they are to be working to apply. Inconsiderate texts do not bear those qualities. So if you are teaching, as mentioned earlier, if you are teaching the informational text structure of compare and contrast, you would want to choose a text that is considerate of that structure, where it is easily identified, versus an inconsiderate text, where the student might be confused about what type of structure the text is demonstrating. All right, that was just a small section on recommendation 4, but I'd like for you to turn it to page 16 of your participant handout and spend a few moments reflecting on the identification of ideas that were confirmed for you in that section about the importance of the selection of text to support the development of comprehension, and be ready to discuss your thinking with your colleagues. In the next few slides, I offer a few resources as support for leading and supporting effective comprehension instruction. None of the resources are intended for a formal evaluation of teachers. They are just meant to be helpful tools to know what you are looking for in the delivery of comprehension instruction. The Reading for Meaning rubric that we've engaged with a couple of times today in this session focuses on the methods the teacher implements to support the reader's interaction and engagement with a specific text for the purpose of constructing meaning. The Reading for Meaning rubric was designed for use by supervisors and administrators to reliably evaluate informally reading for meaning instructional practices, to provide specific, accurate, and actionable feedback based on the components to teachers about the quality of their reading instruction, and ultimately to improve the outcomes for students, all students, including students with disabilities. I would encourage you to continue to explore the ideas and the evidence presented in the IES practice guide titled Improving Reading Comprehension in Kindergarten through 3rd grade. The panel believes students should begin learning how to comprehend text effectively from their earliest school years. This panel has put forth 5 recommendations to guide teacher practice in ways that should improve young students' abilities to understand and remember what they read. These recommendations could be viewed as discrete dishes at a buffet, with teachers sometimes selecting this recommendation or that recommendation based on a situation. However, the panel also would suggest that it might be helpful to think of these recommendations as different facets of an indivisible whole, more like the fingers of a glove. The panel does believe that the integration of these separate recommendations represents the best support for student learning. Teachers should instruct students about how to use reading comprehension strategies and about how texts are organized in order to guide their thinking during reading. But when students are reading in these ways, they should be doing so with high quality texts that are worthy in terms of content and quality. Similarly, it is not enough that students practice strategic reading, but that they must come away with new knowledge from what they read, thus ensuring that strategic reading leads to participation in high quality, meaningful discussions of the content of the text, and that students are motivated to explore the text's meaning deeply through discussion of the text. I've also included in your handouts the School Leaders Literacy Walkthrough, which is designed to assist the leaders in observing specific research-based practices during literacy instruction, or students' independent use or application of those practices. This tool is based on rigorous research that indicates the most effective way to teach reading, and it is aligned to many state standards. This tool is not meant to be used in the evaluation of teachers. Instead, the tool is intended to help school leaders enhance literacy instruction knowledge, communicate with teachers their expectations about literacy instruction, and establish consistent language regarding literacy content and instructional strategies. Further, the use of this tool can be the basis of productive communication and collaboration among school leaders and teachers, and it can inform professional learning needs to improve student achievement in literacy. Well, we have come to the end of our session together, and it has been my honor to lead you through thinking about the recommendations presented in the IES Practice Guide to support and develop comprehension for students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. I want to thank you for your hard work and your focus today, and truly was my pleasure to spend this time with you, and I hope to see you in the future.